January 17, 1940. A winter dawn lies heavy over an airfield in Germany. Grass stiff with frost, hangars sweating cold iron, propellers turning the air into thin knives. In the half-light, engines cough awake like old men clearing their throats. A few ground crew stamp their boots and blow into their hands, the breath vanishing as quickly as it comes. Above them, the sky is a hard, indifferent gray, an empty stage that will soon belong to men who believe they have mastered it. They have reason to believe it. In 1940, the Luftwaffe still carries the momentum of a new kind of war, blitzkrieg not only across roads and rivers, but through the air itself. Its fighter pilots are the elite of an elite, men shaped by Spain, hardened over Poland, and now sharpen their confidence against the approaching storm. They are not merely trained. They are conditioned to think of combat as inheritance, something Europe has always owned, refined, and understood. Across the Atlantic, America is distant, loud, untested. A country of factories and slogans. A nation that has not yet learned what it costs to fight for the sky. That is the premise that will die in flames. Because the moment that matters is not the one where veterans meet veterans, or where legends meet legends. The turning points of the air war are often quieter. An ordinary day, a routine escort, a name on a roster that means nothing to the enemy, a rookie, and a German ace who believes experience is destiny. By the time the air war over Europe matures into its full industrial cruelty, Germany's fighter arm has become both weapon and shield, tasked with defending the Reich from a growing tide of American daylight bombers. Berlin is not merely a city. It becomes an idea. It is political nerve center, symbolic capital, and bait. The Americans know that if they strike it, the Luftwaffe must rise in force, because propaganda demands it, because morale demands it, because Hitler's capital cannot be seen to bleed in daylight without an answer. The cost of forcing that answer is staggering. March 6, 1944. The first major American raid against Berlin. 672 heavy bombers sent against the city and 69 shot down. Numbers that do not feel like numbers when you remember what they contain. Crews, oxygen masks, wedding photos folded into flight jackets, hands frozen around throttles. The Americans returned 2 days later with 462 bombers, escorted by 174 P-51s. A sign that something has changed, because now the bombers are not alone at the edge of the map. Source. And in that change, hidden inside the statistics, inside the mission tallies, inside the grim arithmetic of sorties and losses, is the real story of why German certainty begins to rot from within. The Germans had expected the Americans to fight like amateurs. That expectation was not born only from arrogance. It was also born from observation. Early in the American air campaign, German fighter pilots saw formations that were rigid, escorts that could not stay, and bomber streams that entered German airspace like men walking into a dark forest without a lamp. In 1943, American losses could be catastrophic on deep penetration raids. The Luftwaffe's defense system, fighters guided by ground control, flak belts, disciplined interception tactics, was built to punish exactly that kind of intrusion. And there was another reason for German contempt: the myth of the professional. The Luftwaffe trained pilots who lived and died inside a hierarchy of skill, hours, and combat doctrine. They believed a pilot was forged slowly, through scarcity and excellence, through repetition, through the relentless narrowing of the self into a weapon. In their worldview, a rookie was a liability. A rookie was meat. A rookie was the brief flicker that made an ace possible. But what German pilots began encountering in 1944 was not simply a new aircraft or a new tactic. They began encountering a new civilization's way of making war. One that did not treat skill as a rare jewel, but as something that could be mass-produced without becoming cheap. That paradox is what the rookie represents. He is not a single personality so much as a symptom. A new pilot arrives in theater, young, inexperienced, still smelling faintly of stateside training fields and factory fresh leather, and he does not arrive alone. He arrives as part of a system that can replace him, reinforce him, and feed it with machines, parts, fuel, ammunition, and the quiet confidence that the next convoy will come, and the next one after that. This is what the Luftwaffe cannot match by 1944, even when its best men still outfly their opponents individually, because the war is no longer decided by individual excellence. It is decided by whether excellence can survive attrition. Operation Argument, Big Week, February 20th to 25th, 1944, signals the new stage clearly. It is not only a bombing campaign against aircraft production. It is a campaign designed to force the Luftwaffe into the air and bleed it. German losses are recorded at 262 fighters and 250 aircrew killed or injured, including nearly 100 pilots killed in action. However imperfect any wartime accounting may be, the direction is unmistakable. Germany is spending the thing it cannot afford to spend: experienced men. Source. And this is where the emotional contrast sharpens into something almost unbearable. The German ace expect the sky to obey the old rules. Experience defeats enthusiasm. Veterans defeat boys. Europe defeats America. The American rookie expects something else entirely. He expects to live long enough to learn. He expects a second mission, a third, a 10th. He expects, because the system tells him to expect, that survival is possible. That expectation is a kind of invisible armor, and a symbolic object that keeps appearing quietly, almost shamefully, in memoirs and captured impressions, is not a medal or a flag. It is a ration, a small American box with plain printing, a compact promise of calories and comfort, crackers, meat or cheese spread, powder drink, and something sweet, often chocolate, plus cigarettes and chewing gum. Not luxury, not a feast, but an idea made edible, that even on the edge of death, a democracy tries to keep its citizen soldier fed, steady, and supplied. Source. To the American, it is normal. To the starving logic of collapsing Reich, it is almost obscene. The Luftwaffe pilots who rise to intercept the Berlin-bound streams in early March 1944 do not see ration boxes, of course. They see contrails. They see aluminum shapes stacked in depth. They see escort fighters that do not turn back. But the K-ration belongs in this story because it represents what the German aces are truly fighting. Not merely aircraft, but national capacity and industrial patience that can afford to send rookies into the sky and still keep sending them. Over Berlin, the air becomes an industrial slaughterhouse. The bombers come in mass. The flak rises in black bursts that hang like stains. Fighters cut through formations in slashing attacks. It is cold at altitude in a way that feels less like weather and more like punishment. Oxygen masks press into faces. Sweat freezes inside gloves. Metal becomes treacherous to touch. And in that thin, brutal air, mockery can be as sharp as shrapnel. German pilots had mocked the Americans in earlier phases for flying box formations. Predictable, defensive, mechanical. They had laughed at the idea that mass could substitute for artistry. They had believed, sincerely, that the Americans were a blunt instrument, loud, heavy, and ultimately breakable. But in 1944, American air power begins to learn the German lesson faster than Germany can replace its teachers. Long-range escort changes everything. The P-51 Mustang is not merely a fighter. It is permission. It permits the bombers to reach Berlin with protection. It permits American pilots to meet German fighters not only over targets, but over their own airfields, over the routes home, over the places where German pilots once expected to be safe. It permits the Americans to hunt. And that is what shatters the Luftwaffe's psychological balance. Because defense is exhausting. Defense is reactive. Defense is a slow hemorrhage of initiative. The German ace, call him what he is, a survivor of the early war, expects that the Americans will be tied to bombers like shepherd dogs that cannot leave the flock. He expects that if he attacks with the old confidence, he will find timid pursuit, limited fuel, and escorts that peel away at the edge of their range. Instead, he finds a rookie who stays. A rookie who follows into danger not because he is fearless, but because he has been trained inside a system that assumes continuity, assumes fuel, assumes replacement, assumes tomorrow. The clash is not simply between pilots. It is between assumptions. Here is what the German ace actually experiences: the slow, dawning realization that the Americans are no longer visitors in the European sky. They are residents. They are present in depth, in numbers, and increasingly in skill. And even if a particular American pilot is inexperienced, he is surrounded, protected by the collective competence of the formation, the radio discipline, the escort doctrine, the engines that start reliably the maintenance crews that work through the night, the factories that replace what is lost. The German ace may still fly better in the moment, but the moment is no longer enough. And then comes the event that every air war eventually produces, a single kill that becomes symbolic beyond its tactical value. A German ace, hardened, confident, contemptuous of the American newcomer, makes one mistake. It may be impatience. It may be underestimating the closure rate. It may be the fatigue of too many scrambles, too few hours of sleep, the creeping knowledge that fuel shortages and pilot shortages are eating the Luftwaffe from the inside. It may be the smallest misjudgment of angle and speed. The rookie does not make a speech about it. He does not understand it as history while it is happening. He simply acts. The gun solution steadies. The lead is correct. The trigger press is brief, almost gentle, because even in the cockpit, the body learns to conserve. The .50 caliber stream reaches out and finds its target. Metal ruptures. Fuel ignites. The enemy aircraft becomes something else, an object no longer aerodynamic, no longer controlled, no longer proud. It becomes fire. And that fire is not only a death, it is a message, because when an ace dies to a rookie, the myth of inevitability dies with him. Not the myth that skill matters, but the myth that skill is owned by one nation, one tradition, one ideology. The Luftwaffe, which had once been the modern art of air combat, begins to resemble something older, a declining aristocracy forced into duels it can no longer afford. The transformation is subtle at first, and then it becomes impossible to ignore. German pilots begin the war with ideology wrapped around them like a uniform, confidence in superiority, in destiny, in the claim that history has chosen them. But repeated contact with American abundance, material abundance, manpower abundance, logistical abundance, creates a fracture. It forces a question that propaganda cannot answer. If the Reich is the future, why does it feel so hungry? Why does it feel so thin? Why does it feel like it is running out? Even the smaller details begin to carry weight. A German soldier's daily life narrows as the war goes on, rations tightening, cigarettes limited, replacements younger, training hours shrinking. The Reich that promised plenty becomes a nation of substitutes. Meanwhile, American rations remain American, packaged, standardized, predictable. The K-ration, designed as a lightweight combat ration, includes chocolate, gum, and cigarettes, not as extravagance, but as routine. Source: this is not merely food. It is symbolism. It is the taste of society that has not had its supply chains cut, that still believes the individual matters enough to be sustained even when the individual is far from home. And when German prisoners later speak of American camps, American food, American surprises, ice cream, Coca-Cola, cigarettes, they are not only describing calories, they are describing a psychological defeat. The discovery that the enemy civilization is not collapsing under strain the way German propaganda insisted it would. And in the air war, that discovery happens earlier, because the sky is where abundance becomes visible. The Berlin raid statistics offer the factual spine. 672 bombers, 69 shot down, a cost that would once have been intolerable. Yet the raids continue, not because Americans are indifferent to loss, but because the American system can absorb loss while learning from it, and the Luftwaffe cannot. Source: this is where ideology begins to fail Germany in the cockpit, because Nazism sells a fantasy of the superior man. But the air war reveals a different truth, that modern war belongs to a society that can sustain ordinary men under extraordinary pressure over and over and still keep them supplied, trained, and rotated. The rookie is ordinary. That is his power. He is not a chosen hero. He is not a mythic knight. He is a citizen with flight hours. And when he kills an ace, what burns is not only fuel, it is hierarchy. The German ace expected to die only to another ace, or not at all. He expected, if the end came, that it would come with symmetry, a worthy opponent, a worthy duel, a kind of clean conclusion that preserved the meaning of his earlier victories. Instead, his end comes from a system that manufactures competence in bulk, from a pilot who may still be learning the sky, from a nation that does not need him to be a legend in order for him to be lethal. That is the emotional cruelty of it, and it creates a quiet terror among those who survive. If even the rookies can kill you, what refuge is left? What advantage remains? Some Luftwaffe veterans would later write, in various forms, of the moment they understood the war was turning. Not because they were suddenly outflown, but because they were outlasted. Because every time they climbed to meet the bombers, they were spending irreplaceable experience, while the Americans were spending replaceable machines and replaceable youth. Tragic, yes, but replaceable in the cold logic of industrial war. The sound that recurs in this story, as the symbolic object returns again and again in the narrator's hand, is the small, forgettable noise of abundance. The crinkle of ration paper. A K-ration wrapper folding back in a cramped cockpit. A pilot chewing gum to keep his jaw from locking. A square of chocolate pressed into the mouth before takeoff. Small comforts that do not stop bullets, but keep the mind from drifting into panic. Crinkle. Even when the engine roars, even when flak shakes the aircraft, there is that sound. Proof that somewhere behind the battle, trains run on time, factories produce, quartermasters issue, and a distant homeland still functions. For German pilots by 1944, the war increasingly sounds different. It sounds like shortage. It sounds like engines that cannot be risked in training, like fuel that must be saved, like younger pilots arriving at squadrons with fewer hours and more fear. It sounds like the thinning of the old cadre, the disappearance of familiar call signs from a roster. And against that thinning, the American stream keeps coming. Not perfectly, not without pain, but steadily, which is why Berlin matters. Berlin is where the Luftwaffe is forced to defend pride itself. And pride is a costly thing to defend when your enemy can afford patience. So when the German ace dies, when the rookie's bullets turn him into a falling torch, the story does not end in triumph. It ends in understanding. The rookie has learned something terrible, that he can kill, and that skill is not a guarantee of survival, only a better probability. The German survivors learned something worse, that the Americans are not going away, and that the war they imagine, a war of elite contests, has become a war of systems, a war of production lines, a war where democracy's greatest weapon is not merely ideology but continuity. The epilogue belongs not to the burning aircraft, but to what remains after flames vanish into cloud. Somewhere, far from Berlin, on another cold morning, another American pilot opens a ration box. Maybe he eats without thinking. Maybe he saves the chocolate for later. Maybe the gum is already stale. Maybe the cigarettes are traded away. But the box exists. The wrapper crinkles. The small domestic sound persists inside the machinery of war. And that is the larger truth the German ace could not defeat. A dictatorship can order courage. It can demand sacrifice. It can manufacture fear. But it cannot easily manufacture the quiet, stubborn abundance of society that keeps functioning, feeding its men, replacing its losses, correcting its mistakes, sustaining its effort until the ideology on the other side collapses under its own hunger. Freedom is not always loud in wartime. Sometimes it is only a small square of chocolate in a pocket at 25,000 feet. Sometimes it is a certainty that tomorrow's aircraft will be there, and the next pilot will climb into it, and the next mission will go, not because fate commands it, but because a free nation organized and determined has decided that it will not surrender the sky.